Syria is in a dangerous position right now. The U.S. is left facing a difficult situation as rebel groups make massive advances against the Assad regime. The surprise offensive on Aleppo by Syrian rebel groups has left the U.S. in a difficult position of not supporting either side while also maintaining a force posture of nearly 1,000 troops in Syria as part of an ongoing mission to fight ISIS. And you guys know how much U.S. policies were involved in the inception of ISIS to begin with. And you guys know how the U.S. was involved. I don't know if you guys actually know about the U.S. involvement with Al-Qaeda and how the U.S. actually backed Al-Qaeda during its inception. And then Al-Qaeda was like our boogeyman that we used as a geopolitical tool to enter the Middle East on the world stage. And ISIS largely came out of the marriage between Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra, which heavily U.S. Western intelligence agencies are involved in that whole mess, right? Major General Pat Ryder, the Pentagon press secretary, on Monday distanced the U.S. from the offensive last week, in which rebel groups quickly advanced and took on Aleppo, Syria's second largest city, for the first time in years. Let me be clear that the U.S. is in no way involved in the operations you see playing in and around Aleppo in northwestern Syria, which, as you know, are being led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a designated terrorist organization, he said in reference to a group known as HTS, adding that the U.S. is urging de-escalation. Interesting. Okay, so there's all these disparate groups, right? Who is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham related to, right? Who is that group related to? Because there's all types of connections with these disparate factions. In a lot of ways, a lot of these people make money by destabilizing areas and getting money from Iran and other major players in that part of the world, right? That's another political hotbed, that region, because you've got major players kind of fighting proxy wars with these smaller countries in that area, right? The dilemma for the U.S. was further put into focus by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who told CNN on Sunday that HTS is a terrorist organization designated by the United States, so we have real concerns about the designs and objectives of that organization. Okay, so the U.S. publicly is not aligned at all with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, right? But that does not mean that they aren't involved in more of an intelligence capacity, right? At the same time, of course, we don't cry over the fact that the Assad government, backed by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, are facing certain kinds of pressure, Sullivan added. So it's a complicated situation. It's one where we're monitoring closely and we're staying in close touch with regional partners about it. I don't know, man. To me, the jury's out on whether U.S. intelligence agencies are involved in this, right? Because isn't it aligning with our interests really well? Founder of HTS, Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani, previously started a different group, an al-Qaeda Syrian affiliate called Jabhat al-Nusra, right? We was talking about al-Nusra and al-Nusra related groups. And despite efforts by HTS to distance itself from al-Qaeda, the U.S. designated the group a terrorist organization in 2018, saying it evolved from the original group Jabhat al-Nusra. And we know U.S. intelligence agencies' involvement with al-Qaeda. Okay, so this whole extremist situation, dude, Iran and the Middle East was not as much of an extremist hotbed back in the day, back in the 70s and the 60s, as it is today. Okay, a lot of that is partly their worldview combined with a lot of the Western money, right? But a lot of that is us consistently destabilizing them because it allows us to gain a stronghold on that oil production, right? As you know, they are formally known as the Nusra Front. Okay, boom. An al-Qaeda affiliate group in Syria. Okay, so the intelligence agency connections, I mean, they're clear, right? Unless we all of a sudden dropped them and stopped trying to fund and influence groups in the region. I mean, and what they're doing is exactly in line with our interests right now in the region. So, I mean, look, I'm not going to make any sort of determination, but, you know... But bottom line is, it's still a terrorist organization, Ryder said on Monday of HTS. Yes, so was Al-Qaeda, you know, so was ISIS, right? And we all know that our intelligence agencies were heavily involved with those. Meanwhile, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said on Monday that the U.S. would not lift its sanctions on President Bashar al-Assad's regime, which he said has no change in behavior. The U.S. has applied more sanctions to the regime since 2011, when uprisings in the country began to cut off needed resources as a result of the government's violence against civilians and to pressure the Syrian regime to allow for democratic transition as the Syrian people's demand. This framing is so irritating because the U.S. was funding radical groups to engage in violence, and then the Syrian government responded, and then the U.S. was like, "You're killing your citizens. Why don't you just let your citizens take over?" What, dude? Come on, man. Just let us fund a coup, bro. Like, why don't you just let us regime change you? Like, what? Dude, amid the renewed unrest in the country, roughly 900 U.S. service members are deployed in Syria as part of the anti-ISIS mission. And while the operations in Aleppo are on the other side of the country from where U.S. forces are operating, the instability and primarily Russia's response in assisting the Assad government has resulted in the U.S. military communicating with Moscow to prevent miscalculation. So what they don't want is Moscow to start entering and funding these groups and for some sort of proxy war to start that is going to destabilize any sort of U.S. interests in the region. I mean, that makes total sense, right in line. In response to the surprise advance on Aleppo, Russia, main supporter of the Syrian regime, launched an aerial offensive against armed opposition forces in Aleppo and Idlib provinces. Reuters said on Monday that the U.S. general in charge of the coalition mission to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria has spoken with Russian officials on a pre-established timeline. Okay, that's super interesting that they've got, at least on the surface, aligned interests over here, right? And that they're coordinating. So we got a proxy war in Ukraine, but we're working together in the Middle East. It's very interesting. My understanding is that our CJTF OIR commander has used the hotline that we have with Russia to ensure that we have open lines of communication, given the fact that we do have forces operating in fairly close proximity as it relates geographically to Syria, Reuters said on Monday. I won't go into details about those conversations other than we have that communication mechanism to prevent potential miscalculation. Right. You want to prevent, you've already got stuff going on with the proxy war in Ukraine. You want to prevent another proxy war in the Middle East. So you want Russia to go, you don't want confusion. I understand that. Meanwhile, U.S. and coalition forces in the country are coming under fire as they have for nearly the last year. Asked about reports of attacks over the last 24 hours, Reuters said there was a rocket attack against one of our facilities in Syria, though no U.S. personnel were injured and no infrastructure damage was reported. And on Friday, he said, U.S. forces conducted a self-defense strike near MSS Euphrates, taking out a potential threat to the U.S. base. There were also no injuries or infrastructure damage reported in that incident. Reuters said that was completely unrelated to the ongoing situation in northwestern Syria. He added that there have not been any U.S. force posture changes in Syria. Okay, so, wow, Syria is losing ground to rebels. What the hell is going on out there right now, guys? And at the same time, not only that, but Iran, China, Russia, already under a lot of pressure right now in other places geopolitically on the world stage. So it's pretty crazy to see this happening in Syria, especially at a moment like this. It really seems like it has the chance to threaten the Assad regime. We're already looking at destabilization in Lebanon. Now we're looking at destabilization in Syria. This is literally 2013 2.0. Right? Like, what is going on? And so I'm really over this. I'm super excited for Trump to get into office because I really think that we're going to have much more of a non-interventionist stance. And hopefully we can de-escalate a lot of these foreign conflicts, man. Now, there's a second article relating to this that I wanted to discuss because at the same time that we've got all these geopolitical tensions rising, right? At the same time as you've got Syria under fire, right? At the same time as a lot of these factions that have taken over Aleppo seem tangentially related to factions that the U.S. actually helped conceive or fund, right? At earlier points during our involvement with the Middle East. Okay, so we heard about what's happening in Aleppo. We heard about the Syrian government dealing with destabilization right now from really powerful forces that are threatening it from a force standpoint. So now we've got other interesting things going on. The U.S. and UAE discussed lifting sanctions on Syria's President Bashar al-Assad in exchange for a break with Iran. The U.S. and UAE have discussed with each other the possibility of lifting sanctions on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad as he peels himself away from Iran and cuts off weapon routes to Lebanon's Hezbollah, according to a report citing 5 people familiar with the matter. The U.S. and the United Arab Emirates have discussed with each other the possibility of lifting sanctions on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad as he I always say that wrong, guys, as he peels himself away from the Iran and cuts off weapon routes to Lebanon's Hezbollah. 5 people familiar with the matter said. Who are the 5 people familiar with the matter? I don't know. They always do this with these freaking anonymous sources. The conversations intensified in recent months, the sources said, driven by a possible expiry on December 20th of sweeping U.S. sanctions on Syria by Israel's campaign against the Tehran network, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas in Gaza, and Iran assets in Syria. The discussions took place before anti-Assad rebels swept into Aleppo last week in their biggest offensive in Syria for years. So it's interesting because I was looking at these headlines and I was thinking that conversation was a response to what was going on in Aleppo, right? But interestingly enough, these conversations were before Aleppo was taken. And with everything already going on, I'm not entirely sure that they're going to be interested in talking to a new group to see if that new group has any sort of relationship to U.S. interests. Not to mention the fact that new group is a spinoff of al-Nusra related to al-Qaeda and ISIS. So more than likely they do not have any alignment with U.S. interests unless we were to use them as a destabilization force, right? And so it's interesting now to hear this conversation of attempting to diplomatically work Assad more over to our side in the region. And it really lines up with what just happened in Aleppo. And it's making me wonder whether the international community is going to step in from a diplomatic standpoint, similar to Ukraine and Israel with Assad, right? And that would be a complete reversal of what we saw a decade ago in the Middle East. I mean, wild, right? According to the sources, the new rebel advance is a signal of precisely the sort of weakness in Assad's alliance with Iran that the Emirati and U.S. initiative aims to exploit. Right, okay. But if Assad embraces Iranian help for a counteroffensive, that could also complicate efforts to drive a wedge between them. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi visited Syria on Sunday in a show of support for Assad. And UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan spoke to Assad by phone about the latest developments at the weekend. For this story, Reuters spoke to 2 U.S. sources, 4 Syrian and Lebanese interlocutors, and 2 foreign diplomats who said the U.S. and UAE see a window to drive a wedge between Assad and Iran, which helped him recapture swaths of his country during the civil war that erupted in 2011. Yeah, I mean, the U.S., largely U.S. Intelligence agency involved a civil war that happened in 2011. And what's wild is, so Assad is weak right now. And we're seeing this happen right now. It aligns with U.S. interests that we were never able to get done a decade ago, right? To me, the jury's still out as to whether U.S. intelligence agencies are using these disparate groups as a destabilization force, because they exactly want to drive a wedge between Iran and Iran's proxies in the region, right? And so this is the perfect opportunity. It aligns so well. It's sure. Things are already fomenting. Things are popping up and bubbling all over the world. So maybe we're just taking advantage of it. But, I mean, it aligns so well. Lebanese media have reported that Israel had suggested lifting U.S. sanctions on Syria, but the UAE initiative with the U.S. has previously not been reported on. All of the sources spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the backroom diplomacy. Okay. Syria's government and the White House did not respond to questions from Reuters. The UAE referred Reuters to its statement on Bill Zayed's call with Assad. The UAE has taken a leading role in rehabilitating Assad among the mainly Sunni Muslim Arab states that shunned him after he accepted the help from the Shiite non-Arab Iran to put down the Sunni-led rebellion against him. Well, I mean, okay, yeah. I mean, just off this paragraph and the framing they used, you can see why both that group would be upset at him and why he would have leaned on Iran when he's not having any cultural support from that demographic. The Emirates hosted Assad in 2022, his first visit to an Arab country since the start of the war, before the Arab League reinstated Syria's membership. The UAE has long hoped to distance Assad from Iran and wants to build business ties with Syria, but U.S. sanctions have hampered those efforts. So it looks like Syria is really torn between two different influences, right? One is the United Arab Emirates, which are connected to the U.S., and the other one is Iran, which is their most powerful and closest geopolitical partner, just right up in the region, right? And so you can see for a regime that's attempting to maintain power through a whole bunch of destabilization, how they could look to Iran for support, since not only are they right there, but they are a supporter and trade partner, right? And they're the most powerful one in the region. A senior regional diplomat, briefed by Tehran, told Reuters Iran had been informed about the behind-the-scenes efforts by some Arab countries to isolate Iran by distancing Syria from Tehran. The diplomat said these efforts were linked to offers of possible sanction relief by Washington. Carrot and stick. That's so funny because that's exactly what just entered my mind. Hezbollah and its patron Iran have intervened in Syria since 2012 to protect Assad against Sunni rebels, but their bases and weapons shipments through Syria have been repeatedly hit by Israel, which has sought to weaken Iran across the region. In recent months, Hezbollah withdrew fighters from Syria, including the north, to focus on battling Israel in southern Lebanon. The rebels who swept this week into Aleppo pointed to the Hezbollah withdrawal as one of the reasons why they face little resistance from government forces. Wow, man. So there's real ripple effects happening right now from everything that's going on in Israel in ways that we did not expect. And is this part of a larger strategy? I mean, this stuff is playing out like some big chess move, and I'm not seeing what the game is. If that makes any sense, how I'm laying that out. A U.S. source familiar with the matter said White House officials discussed an overture with the Emirati officials, citing the UAE's interest in financing Syria's reconstruction and Assad's weakened position after the Israeli offensive against Hezbollah. The possibility of sanctions relief for Assad, while Israel was hitting Iran's allies, created an opportunity to apply a carrot and stick approach to fracture Syria's alliance with Iran and Hezbollah, the U.S. sources said. Sanctions relief. The U.S. placed sanctions on Syria after Assad cracked down against protests against him in 2011, and the sanctions were repeatedly tightened in the years that followed the war after. The toughest, known as the Caesar Act, passed in Congress in 2019. Wow, we were still sanctioning him in 2019. The Caesar sanctions apply across Syrian business sectors to anyone dealing with Syria regardless of nationality, and to those dealing with Russian and Iranian entities in Syria. Assad said they amounted to economic warfare, blaming them for Syria's currency collapse and drop in living standards. Well, I mean, isn't that the point? The sanctions will sunset or expire on December 20th unless renewed by U.S. lawmakers. Parts of the recent American-Emirati discussion centered on allowing Caesar sanctions to expire without renewal, said U.S. sources and three of the Syrian interlocutors. One Syrian interlocutor said that the UAE has raised letting them expire with the White House officials 2 months ago. After having unsuccessfully pushed for at least 2 years for sanctions relief for Assad, and after a deadly earthquake in February 2023. Damn, bro, Syria is getting hit. Mohammed Allah Ghanem, a Syrian activist in Washington, D.C., with the Citizens for a Secure and Safe America, told Reuters his group had been working to extend the Caesar sanctions, and it assessed they had bipartisan support to do so. Okay, so very interesting, man. Very interesting. Because it looks like there's both support for and against extending these sanctions. And there's a unique opportunity to take advantage of what's going on in Syria right now. Now, how much of that opportunity was manifested through intentional involvement? We've been in talks over this past couple months, although of course no political outcome in a town like Washington can be guaranteed 100%. Arab states have other potential avenues towards rewarding Assad for distancing himself with Iran. A foreign diplomat based in the Gulf told Reuters that UAE and Saudi Arabia in recent months had offered financial incentives for Assad to split with Iran, saying they could not have been made without coordination from Washington. Yeah, you're going to need somebody else to step up there and be a trade partner with Assad if we have any hope of changing the relationship that they've got right now with Syria. A source with knowledge of the matter told Reuters that Syria, among other crises in the region, were a topic of discussion during the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's visit to the UAE on Sunday. These names, bro. A Lebanese interlocutor said that the UAE had also pledged funds to help Syria rebuild war-ravaged infrastructure as a way to pull Assad further from Iran. Iran has warned Assad not to stray far. But I mean, what's going on with Iran and its influence in the region if one of its proxies, Hezbollah, has pulled out so far it can't even protect Syria anymore? Dude, if you're not able to protect Syria, they don't have much of a choice, do they? The senior regional diplomat briefed by Tehran said Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei conveyed a message via his senior advisor Ali Larijani, who told Assad, "Do not forget the past." The message served as a reminder to Assad of who his true allies are, said the diplomat. Playing with fire. Since Hamas militants attacked Israel on October 7th last year, precipitating the war in Gaza, Iran has mobilized its network of allies to hit Israel. But Assad has largely avoided joining in, even as Israel struck Hezbollah targets in his country and bombed Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus. Wow. He must be in a severely weakened position. He must be ready for anyone to come out with a handout. No wonder the U.S. First off, it hasn't worked. Regime change in Syria. And so with him in this weakened position and with everything going on, no wonder the U.S. is like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity to try some carrot and stick diplomacy. U.S. officials said Assad had sat out the war to avoid further Israeli strikes on Syria and remained under tremendous pressure not to allow Hezbollah to rearm through his country. Wow. Israel has signaled that it still has eyes on Syria. When announcing the truce with Lebanon last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel had been thwarting attempts by Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria's army to bring weapons into Lebanon. Assad must understand he's playing with fire, Netanyahu said. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. Assad is really weak, and his friends do not seem like they're able to protect him right now. So this seems like maybe it's the perfect time to step in and gain more leverage in the region that we could use for some de-escalation and some long-term stability. Well, guys, what's going on in Syria? Really thought it was interesting. I'll see you guys in the next one, man. Thank you so much.